Welcome back. I've got Helen Hanison online. Helen, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we talked a bit about this in the pre-show. But before we jump too far into it, why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll start this great conversation.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Helen Hanison and I'm a leadership coach. I've added sort of narrative therapy and positive psychology to all of that. But I think what's probably more relevant for your audience to know is that I had a career one. This is career two. So I pivoted from my own professional past in about a 20-year tour of duty in big PR firms. And today, what I do is help people do their version of that kind of purposeful career redesign when they feel horribly stuck because they need to realign work they actually love with what matters to them most.
I think a lot of people have felt stuck, and I think the pandemic kind of amplified that a bit for some people. I think they were feeling it beforehand, but they just weren't quite sure. But I think the pandemic helped them kind of take a moment when we were all sent home in March of 2020 to just reflect a bit. And then once they started going back to work or things started getting to whatever normal is, they realized that maybe this isn't just what they want to do anymore. And time and time again, we're seeing that we're seeing, a significant increase in CEOs leaving organizations, and the retention issues in many organizations over the last few years has been, a focal point for a lot of companies. And I'm guessing a lot of it has to do with just people, you want something different, but they're not necessarily sure. And I think that's where the work that you do, comes in really, really well to help because ultimately, when you can figure out, what you want to do when you grow up is a phrase I hear a lot, but I always tell people don't grow up, it's a trap. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you have some clarity around what you want to do and more importantly, what you don't want to do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's really interesting. I think we're talking a bit less about the pandemic now, but you're so right. That I think was such a unique pocket of time, and we kind of wore out the word unprecedented, didn't we? But it was amazing that from such a sort of negative in the world in so many ways, something positive could be cultivated from it. And I think that's what happened, certainly for the sort of quite seasoned professionals that I work with on a one-to-one basis anyway, is that they had more space and time, still at work, and that was still demanding. But by stripping away all the context, actually, they really honed in on what mattered to them and understood that they were perhaps propelled along with some of their deliverables or some of their ambitions or some of the structure around them. Perhaps the people obviously got stripped away or made very one-dimensional, and that they were missing something. And I think that's, to me, the key, and certainly at the heart of the coaching that I do, actually. It's not just what you bring. So it's not just the skills and the strengths you've accrued through your career story so far. It's also, or should be, about what do you need? What's missing for you? And that's where the really well aligned career redesigns come from. So the pandemic was actually an amazing sort of little pocket of time, a bit of a vacuum that kind of enforced some hesitation for people. People had to hesitate because the world just wasn't responding in the normal way. There was enough uncertainty about futures, even for very well established people, or perhaps especially, that it kind of focused them on questioning, well, what do they want to happen in their next career chapter? What if they couldn't go back to what they've been doing today? What if? And I think that there was a bit of a perfect storm actually for certainly a lot of people to really reimagine what that meant for them in their career life designs.
I anticipate that, some people are, it's the best word that comes to mind is afraid to kind of play that what if, even though it's basically a sandbox where you say you can create and play however you like. What if doesn't matter, there's no rules. What would you like to do in your next career? And just
Yeah.
approach it from, and one of the things that I've done in the work that I do with burnout recovery and prevention, even in my own personal burnout recovery many, many years
Mm.
ago, was I approach things and went way back in time, and I just started approaching
Mm.
things with a childlike curiosity and no
Yeah.
judgment, just flat out curious. Okay, what is this? Why do I want to do this? What is something that intrigues me that I would love to do that, maybe I didn't want to do earlier in my career? And I think that's a key point to make is I think people need to give themselves permission to dream and to,
Yeah.
create. And I think they've been beaten down so much through a variety of different reasons that
Mm.
they're just struggling with that. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm a bit allergic actually. Whenever I see someone talking about or I read about follow your passion, it's one of those that sort of makes me shudder inwardly and think, actually, no, follow your curiosity. I think passion is something we cultivate for ourselves. And what happens is we lose touch with what that is or was, or, to be fair, it also shifts over time. So it is something that you have to sort of keep zoned into or checking into. And I think, again, when you're quite well established in your career with responsibilities, in what I call a bit of a success trap, it's a long way to drop when you start thinking. And that's where this fear sets in about what else might I do? And almost immediately you've even finished the words, then what comes through loud and clear is the sort of inner critical chatter about, well, you can't because, and society expects, and outside others expect, and you mustn't. And that isn't a good amount of sort of space to ideate. And career redesign, I think, is a creative process. So it's very interesting to hear you say follow your curiosity, which I would wholeheartedly support. And I think one of my favorite questions to ask people when I think there's a bit of a block there, and you're right, I think fear is almost common, with everyone I tip into conversational coaching relationships with, is who do you secretly envy and why? Because again, we're taught, culturally that maybe envy isn't an attractive feeling and we perhaps shouldn't let that one in. But there's amazing clues if you're a bit stumped with that question about what are you passionate about, understandably, or even what are you interested in and curious about. So that you can start following breadcrumbs. Who you secretly envy sort of reveals quite a lot. And I don't think it has to be literal that you then copy that person's pathway, but it's an amazing start point to collect conversations with people who you admire something, maybe not everything, but something about their pathway, and discover more. How did they sort of travel that career journey from where they used to be to where they are today, and what nuggets could you extrapolate out from that voyage of discovery? Perhaps there are connections if it is a bit literal. So there's a lot there. So I think that's really, really strong and compelling advice.
I think it's important to find mentors, and they can be people that you envy as well. But I always encourage, and I've done it in my career too, is to find people that if there's a certain stage I want to hit or an accomplishment, you look for people that have done it before, and if you can, find people that have done it recently or relatively recently, and typically those people are more than happy to share because we love the ability to demonstrate our own expertise. It's one of the
Mm.
things that we do as leaders and coaches and whatnot is we love when people honor our expertise, and we love to be able to share it because our intent, hopefully, is to help people get to where they want to be and where they want to get to. And I think when we do that, we get so much from it as well. As
Yeah.
coaches and leaders, we thrive on it. When someone does something really good, or someone I have a conversation with, and they say, "Well, I'm thinking about doing this," and I encourage them. I said, "Please do it. I beg you, because the world needs it." Well, there's so many others, of course, but when someone wants to write a book, like, and we're going to jump into your book in a moment, a lot of people will have that initial fear. Well, there's so many other books out there. Yes, but there isn't any out there from you. And the world needs you because your experience, your perspective, your take on things might make a huge, huge difference in someone's life. And I get feedback from the books that I've published, and people said I implemented that and it did this. and it blows me away. And it's like,
Mm.
wow, okay, all right, that's powerful. I appreciate you sharing that with me because it helps people get to where they want to be. And when we have that ability, it's magical. I just get tingles thinking about it right now about it. But so let's dive into your book. I ask this, I interview a lot of authors. I always ask them, why in the world would you want to give up so much of your life to write a book? Because it's not something you necessarily do in a day. It takes time. So, share us a bit about the journey of the book and some of the favorite points in the book that you want to highlight.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, it's an interesting, this felt like a very long pregnancy or something to give birth to this book baby, but not because of the writing. I think the idea was born back in the pandemic, actually, where I got to a point where it was I was at capacity and couldn't take on any more one-to-one coaching clients. And I was being asked, do you have a book? Do you have a course? And I didn't have either. So the idea began from there, and I sort of very quickly put an online course together, which is now all polished up and sort of, a standalone offering, Purposeful Career Redesign. But it was in doing that I noticed that I was calling stages of the book chapters and thought, oh, look, I think I've just written a book outline. Um, and, PR used to be career one, as I said, so I do like writing. And that's where the idea came from. So honestly, it felt like something that I needed a pocket of time to come back to. And I had a bit of a health hiccup that sort of enforced a pocket of time. And that, as I was popping back to the surface, thought, actually, this is the time that things have slowed somewhat, not in terms of my roster of clients, but in all the outside work that sort of goes around being a solopreneur. And it's actually very clever timing, therefore, to do this. So that was how and why the book came about. The book is basically my coaching formula for about the last 10 years now, all dumped into one place. And being a coach, this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but I don't really want people to just read the book. I want it to be actionable, and I've been very, very intentional about that. So within each of the three acts of Purposeful Career Redesign, there are QR codes in every chapter that lead people to the exact resources I've been using with my one-to-one clients, so that people can actually put the book down and really engage on a slightly deeper level as they're moving through the active alignment, which is, essentially intense self-awareness, where we become self-expert. What does any career redesign that you come up with need to align with if you're going to feel alive and aligned doing work you love? What does that look like? And then the next one is about career redesign. And that act is a few chapters that's completely different gear. It's very actionable, very concrete, taking pilot tests in the real world this time, exploring ideas, several, plural, that you're coming up with. So you're sort of always gathering information and refining and tweaking as you move through. And the final one is transformation. So all in all, the formula is called ACT, Aligned Career Redesign Transformation. So that final one is a really balanced mix of how to navigate practical barriers, but also inner obstacles, the mindset mastery that it takes to actually persevere long enough to succeed, and especially in the face of setbacks. So it sort of brings in all the positive psychology and narrative therapy into that, because sadly, designing the plan isn't actually enough on its own. So that's the book, called Unstuck, A Smart Guide to Purposeful Career Redesign.
I'm thankful that you wrote the book, and I love what you mentioned at the onset about, the intent is for, people to, carry forward and do the work. And what happens is, and I see this time and time again, you could make the book as easy as possible, literally color by numbers easy, and, and hand them all the right crayons and tell them which crayon to use at that particular moment. But there is a certain portion of the population that still will be stuck even after they follow everything. And that's where the coaching comes in, because it's having a conversation. And I think that's one of the things that is one of the powerful things anyway of coaching and working with people is just kind of having them, talk it out. And, coaching and therapy, there's so many synergies because I'm both. And it kind of cross blends. It's like, okay, well, is that this or is that that? It's like, well, the answer is it's kind of both. But I think ultimately, for you to take, basically, your decade plus of work and, obviously your career experiences and all of that and put them into a book where people can, especially if they're action takers, they could take it, they can run with it,
Mm.
work through the book and find their whatever there is, to, find that, what do I want to do and get unstuck. Again, that is the benefit to society because the more people that are not stuck, that means they're doing the work that they're truly meant to do and enjoy doing. And we all benefit from that as a society when people are in that state. And there's a ton of people now, in my opinion and observation, that are stuck. So they need to really take a long, hard look at this book and implement some of the easy to implement, but it's also easy not to implement. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Pardon the pun. There is when you want to improve, we have this gravitational pull to just kind of stay in comfort lane. And it's like, no, you got to kind of push yourself. And that's how we grow. We think of all the tragedies and experiences in life that we have, the good ones and maybe the not so good ones. But ultimately, those challenging situations are the ones that really shape us and get us to improve. So, this book is definitely one of those tools you want to have in your tool belt to be able to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This idea of owning career stuckness. I was interviewed on a radio program in the UK quite recently, and it was sort of a panel interview, and it was really interesting. People came in and sort of started talking about their career context and were kind of reluctant to own that they were stuck, but one by one found different words to express and articulate how they were less than happy. Some were absolutely miserable where they worked. Others were coping positively, but not loving it. It was a range. But to me, if you're anything less than 100% happy and you're not doing something to change that, you're stuck. And I think the thing that I'm really aware of in the work that I do is that that feeling of stuckness is something that starts off maybe as a bit of a whisper. It's quite faint. It starts off just a bit of frustration, a bit of discontent, and it ends up being such a loud volume that actually what you do every day is bankrupt of all meaning. And to do that every day till retirement is absolutely unthinkable. So it's about noticing it early enough to give yourself the luxury of time, I think, to go on this sort of redesign process and feel safe and comfortable and confident despite the disruptive steps that are absolutely inevitable in making change happen. It's interesting, isn't it? How we all experience it, but the language that we put to it and the social prescription maybe of persevering is so strong that actually it's holding us stuck in itself.
I think too, and we talked a bit about this in the pre-show as well. I think some people are stuck because the organizations that they're in, are not clearly articulating, or maybe they're not acting purposefully. And I know that's another arena that you love to work in, is helping
Mm.
organizations become really purposeful in things. So I'll share briefly about that work as well, because they ebb and flow together. I know sometimes you think, well, I'm working with a company or I'm working with an individual, but ultimately you are impacting both in the work you do. So I want you to share a little bit about that as well.
It's so true, because everyone I work with on an individual basis is inhabiting some kind of corporate home. And so working directly with the leadership in companies, businesses, organizations, charities is, I think, probably some of the most meaningful work that I do. What's interesting is the work isn't different. What it's all about is this, what I called active alignment, when I was talking about the book and the course, because I think we're all pretty good, and certainly corporates are very good at having what they might call a mission statement, or values, or both. I think mission statement is a bit more sort of intentional. Values hopefully are a bit more actionable and lived into, but that's where the disconnect can be. It's the same with individuals. We can come up with these aspirational terms, but as somebody who's working within an organization or even a team, if you are observing or experiencing a disconnect between the things that the company is saying are the most important guiding factors, but you observe they're not honoured, they're violated, even worse, that's where people just disengage, and ultimately they don't stay, because that's a horribly uncomfortable place to be, perhaps individually, but also more generally longer term. So what happens is people retreat into this other place, I think, employees, I mean, of thinking, well, for my resume, I need to build this much time. I need to accrue that experience, that skill set. So I'll do what serves me and tolerate, but I'm already thinking that way. And that to me feels like a miss. And I think that happens sometimes not because leadership is sort of meaning it to. I think there are really, really strong and good intentions, but where it's sort of the ideation is happening sort of up there somewhere and it doesn't translate down is one problem. But for me, the biggest problem is that, are we also talking to the people who populate the team or company and asking what feels purposeful for their career? Because actually where we can create synergy is where the magic source happens. And that's where you get incredible loyalty and problem solving powers like sort of none other, if you can get that mix right or balance right for people.
Yeah, it's amazing work you're doing, and I'm really thrilled that you took the time to write this very important book. So, Helen, where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Thank you. So the book is probably easiest on Amazon. For me, generally, I would say helenhanison.com. That sort of has, a bit of information about everything I'm up to. Those are probably the main two. There's LinkedIn. I always love to connect with people on LinkedIn, actually.
There you go. And I'll definitely have the links to all of that in the show notes. So, Helen, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate you and really thankful that we had this time to chat today.
Oh, me too. Thank you again for having me.